Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, today I want to spend a little bit of time talking with you all about uniques, but not just any uniques, the unique items that are proving to be the perfect mix of rare and powerful. There are just very few of them actually out in the world, and a very large amount of players who actually want them. Whether you already know which one of these you're after, or if you're just merrily heading through the game finding things as you go, it's highly likely that at least one of these items would be in active use on your character if you had the option of using them. So let's break down 17 specific unique items of particular note, where they come from, or how to get them specifically, and why they are so sought after, as well as the general prices on the trade market if you wanted to outright purchase one, and we'll talk a bit more about that concept at the end too. First up, let's start with the RNG drops. These are uniques that have a chance, albeit a particularly low one, to spawn anywhere in the game, even when just interacting with the vendors that give you random items for a specific slot in exchange for gold, the gambling vendors. First up then, Everlasting Gaze, and this is by far the cheapest of the items on this list at this stage, and that's because while it offers incredible power with a ton of mana solutions on a singular item, and the fact that you can apply mana specific quality to it too, but then also the extra tankiness of turning a portion of your maximum mana into bonus energy shield, and with all of the stormweavers, especially with their archmage builds, building a ton of maximum mana and intelligence already, it just made a very natural combination that made this item very, very expensive in the first stages of the game. It has since gone down a bit as there are technically better long-term amulets for the builds, but I still thought that this one was worth talking about as one of the most sought after mid-game uniques, still averaging around one divine orb on the trade market if you wanted to get one of your own, which, while still a lot for many players, is actually extremely reasonable compared to pretty much any other item on this list. Next up then we have the Headhunter Belt. This is great for pretty much any ascendancy unless you are using a specific other item within the belt slot. Belts are generally not the most effective slot in Path of Exile 2 in your gear, but Headhunter's main effect is incredible specifically for content like mapping, where you're likely to just float around from rare enemy to rare enemy, killing a bunch of stuff in between, and with this you would steal their modifiers to boost your own power anytime that you kill a rare. Obviously this isn't great for like pinnacle bosses or stuff like that where you won't really be fighting rares in the middle of it, but for mapping, which is the majority of the endgame, this thing is absolutely incredible. As for the price, around 15 divine orbs. Yep, we are jumping up quite a ton from the first item very quickly, and the reason is partially because despite being capable of dropping anywhere in the game, it is exceedingly low of a chance to drop, and then just because this is obviously in high demand for the people who already farm maps all day anyways, the people who are already making loads of currency before getting this item, and so the price of it was set based on that, essentially. After that we have Ventvous Gamble, and the name is extremely accurate for this one. Again, this one is a random drop to actually happen in the first place. It can happen anywhere in the game, but this one is more random than most, as the name might imply. It can roll up to like 15% rarity of items found as an implicit, then anywhere from 0 to 80 bonus maximum life, anywhere from 0 to 20 bonus spirit, negative 40% to positive 40% item rarity, so a bad roll will literally decrease the rarity of items found, whereas the best roll would be goddamn 40% increase, and then you can also on top of that roll anywhere from negative 40% to positive 40% on all of the different elemental resistances, so a minimum roll version of this ring would be 0 life, 0 spirit, negative 40% rarity of items found, and negative 40% to all elemental resistances. Obviously, that would be pure garbage. You would never even equip that. It's not worth even a single exalted orb, but each stat rolls independently. So the flip side of that, a perfectly rolled version is 80 bonus maximum life, 20 bonus spirit, 40% rarity of items found, and 40% to all of your element resists essentially, which is nuts. A roll of this ring where the only thing particularly high is rarity of items found, and the other stats are all just at least positive or decent, is going for 70 to 80 divine orbs on average, which is obviously absurd. But also in a lot of players' minds, this is an accurate value for what this item offers, especially when you consider mixing it with the Ingenuity Belt that we'll be talking about later on, which boosts the modifiers on your rings too. Next up then we have another unique ring, Dream Fragments. This is heavily sought after by nearly half the player base at least, as around half of the people playing Path of Exile 2 are playing the stormweaver ascendancy, and the majority of those players either already are or will eventually be branching into archmage focused builds. Archmage gives you bonus lightning damage on spells per maximum mana that you have, and Dream Fragments gives you 20% increased maximum mana on your ring slot, which is an insane bonus to that build concept. Then you can boost this even further with the mana specific quality increasers on rings to bring it up to 24% increased maximum mana, not to mention that you can boost this even further again through the belt that I mentioned before too. Outside of this, it also offers immunity to chill and freeze, which in itself just makes playing the game way more comfortable, but also the boost to maximum mana is essentially a massive boost to your overall overall damage output for an Archmage Stormweaver, so this one being 83 divine orbs for even a minimum roll on the cold resistance implicit is absolutely insane, but that's what happens when an item is this strong for the most popular build archetype that exists in the game right now. Then we have the Astramentis Unique Amulet. This one is just as stellar as its item type implies. It's another RNG drop like all the ones we talked about until this point, and it gives you an implicit modifier bonus of up to 7 all attributes, but then 80 to 100 to all attributes as its main effect, and then -4 physical damage taken from all attack hits, which is a very specific term that means it's very good at reducing tiny hits of damage, but not big ones. However, the main part of this by far is the 100 to all attributes. You can also apply attribute specific quality to an amulet like this, so a perfect 100 roll could go up to 120 to all attributes, which is even crazier. And while this has a ton of potential value for a lot of players in general, where this is specifically popping off is with both invoker and gemling legionnaire builds that use this and then percent attribute increases to build around a pair of gloves that boost attack speed based on dex and lightning damage based on intelligence, and then a unique quarterstaff that gives area of effect based on intelligence, attack speed based on dexterity, and weapon damage based on strength. And then you just stack all of these attributes ridiculously to make one of the strongest build that exists. But it does come at a cost, as Astramentis by itself is at its lowest, around 114 divine orbs right now, and it can go up to 180 or higher divine orbs as you approach a perfect roll. It is insanely strong, and it is a core item within a powerful build, and it's got the price to match that. That's all of our random drop trance uniques and the ones that can technically drop from anywhere, so now we're going to dive into the ones that have more specific farming methods. Specifically, all of these drop from a particular endgame pinnacle boss, and we will mention which one that it is for each item too. First up here we have the Ingenuity Belt unique. This thing is absolutely exceptional. It is dropped from the King in the Mists, who is the pinnacle boss for the ritual endgame activity. The main effect on this is a 40 to 80% increase to the bonuses that are gained from your equipped rings, meaning it simply increases the modifiers on your rings by that amount. A low roll of this belt can be as low as 12 divine orbs to trade for, which is still of course not cheap, with a maximum roll of it being closer to 45 divine orbs. And if you want one that has had a Val orb applied to increase it all the way up to 90% increases to your rings, you're looking at a mirror, which is the equivalent of 200 divine orbs. So why is it so valuable? Well, drop back a couple of steps here. Imagine a 90% boost on a perfectly rolled Ventvous Gamble, the unique ring we just talked about. Suddenly that would instead be 152 bonus maximum life, 38 bonus spirit, 76% rarity of items found, plus another 28.5% from the implicit, and then 76% to all elemental resistances on the one ring. Now, does the value make sense for the belt? Yeah, maybe it does, because that is absolute insanity, and that's just one of the rings it would be boosting. So let's say that you had that perfect Ventvous Gamble, but then you also had Dream Fragments as your other ring. The Dream Fragments with full mana quality applied and a 90% bonus from the belt would then give you 45.6% increased maximum mana. That is simply insane. And of course, a perfectly crafted rare ring could gain a ton of value from this as well, especially a breach ring with up to 50% quality. So in a world where the belt slot is just sort of meh, a belt which makes your rings stronger is incredibly powerful and valuable as well. Another unique from the King in the Mist pinnacle boss then to keep an eye out for specifically is the From Nothing Jewel. There are dozens of different versions of this item, and what it does is lets you put passive points into passives within the range of a specific keystone on the passive tree without having to connect to it. This one, for example, lets you take passives within the radius of the Giant's Blood keystone without connecting to the entire rest of your tree. So let's say you're like a monk. You started in the top right in the Dex and Int mixed section of the passive tree, but you want something from this section down here deep in the strength side of the tree. Stick in this jewel somewhere and you can then take anything within that radius. This is of course an extremely complex item. The fact that you can basically get one tied to each keystone passive means the variety between them and their potential value is insane. So you see these going for as low as 1 divine orb up to the 60 to 70 divine orb range is the highest I've seen one actually sell for. Following that, we have one of the cheaper items on the list, the Hand of Wisdom and Action Unique Gloves. These are a drop from Zest, who is the pinnacle boss for the Breach endgame activity. They give up to 25 dexterity and 25 intelligence, and then give you scaling attack speed per dexterity that you have on your character, and scaling lightning damage on attacks per intelligence that you have. By themselves, these gloves are not bad, but as you gain more stats, you get better and better. And then if you combine them with something like the Astramentis Amulet that we talked about earlier, that in itself with 25 of each stat on the gloves and 120 of each from Astramentis would then make this give you around 17% attack speed and around 14 to 140 bonus lightning damage on attacks too, which doesn't count any of the rest of your equipment or passive points as well. That said, without something else boosting its power, it is somewhat limited as a pair of gloves as a singular unique, which is why you can find a well-rolled one for like 6 divine orbs, or a worse roll for even as low as 3 or 4 divine orbs. The other unique really worth keeping an eye out for from Zesht, the Breach Pinnacle boss then, is the Controlled Metamorphosis unique jewel. This allows passives within the radius to be chosen without being taken themselves, at the cost of less resistances. The negatives are relatively minimal if you are playing a Chaos Inoculation build, which is very popular in general, and the positive is essentially the same as the last unique jewel, but instead of relying on the RNG of it dropping and having the specific keystone you want passives within range of, you choose the positioning for this one because it radiates from your jewel slot. In that sense, it can't get you things that are on the opposite side of the skill tree, but it can save you a bunch of what I like to call sort of travel points, which are passive points that you would spend on negligible increases in order to reach something that you actually wanted, something actually important. This one generally only costs around 1 divine orb a piece if you want an uncorrupted one, but they can actually go down to even 30 exalted to trade for it, so they're not crazy to acquire, but it is a valuable item if you know how and where to put it within your setup. Next up, we have a couple of uniques that come from the Pinnacle boss tied to the Expedition endgame activity. The first one is Olroth's Resolve, a unique flask. This gives you instant recovery on a 920 base life flask up to 1104 with full quality applied, so instant 1100 recovery from your flask, with the cost of increased charges per use, of course, but then the unique bonus of any excess life recovery turns into Guard for 10 seconds. Guard essentially acts as overflow that takes damage before your energy shield or life, so a whole bonus layer of defense, and it can protect from one-shots if you see them coming a little bit ahead of time as a result of this. This one generally sells for right around 40 divine orbs on the trade market, and there basically isn't a better life flask in the game in a world where one-shots and stun locks are the majority of player deaths in the endgame. The other unique tied to the Expedition Pinnacle boss that I want to talk about here is Svalin, which is actually a relatively cheap item for this list, but it drops only from a Pinnacle boss and is considered extremely powerful, especially in the hands of a warrior. This is being used on Titans too, but mostly on warbringers due to some specific synergy in their ascendancy. But the shield itself gives you a relatively low base block chance of 26%, but then gives you lucky block chance. Lucky means that it will roll your block chance twice, so if your first block chance roll fails, it will try a second time before letting the hit through. This has special increased value for warbringers, especially as they have an ascendancy node that can set the base block chance of all shields to 40% no matter what, which gets rid of the negatives from the shield, and they can also make block affect all hits even without raising the shield itself. And on a well-built warbringer, you can hit anywhere from 60% or more block chance to every hit that comes at you, even with Svalin, and have it be lucky as well as a result, so the failed 60% rolls get a second 60% attempt, which is just absolutely incredible for your survivability. That said, the actual price of a decent Svalin is actually only 1 or 2 divine orbs, not bad at all for how strong this can be. Moving on, we have the Pinnacle boss at the end of the hardest difficulty level of the Trial of the Sekimas, who is Zarok. This boss drops quite a number of interesting things, but one you may not expect to hear about on this list is the Last Flame Relic. He drops multiple unique relics, but this one by itself is selling for over 130 divine orbs. Why? Because if you complete a run with this relic on, you are guaranteed to get the singular most expensive unique item in the game, Temporalis. The relic itself isn't a guarantee just because you have it though, as it sets your maximum honor to 1, so you have to get through a full Trial of the Sekimas without ever losing a single point of honor, completely hitless, on a minimum of area level 80, so all 4 floors and then the Pinnacle boss at the end as well. And the opportunity to do that is being sold for 130 divine orbs. That is nuts, right? Well, next up, let's talk about Temporalis itself. The only way to have this drop is through the absurd method with the relic we just talked about, and it is just an absolutely insane unique in itself. For reference of the rarity of this, there are a whole 16 of this item currently in the trade system overall. Only 16 of them. The cheapest one is 175 divine orbs, which is corrupted before quality applied. Whoops. And not a full roll on the main stat either, which is skills have up to -2 to -4 seconds to their cooldown. A -4 second roll is anywhere from 200 to 230 divine orbs. It does fluctuate depending on the sellers, as again, there are only 16 of these up for grabs just in total. The main thing that this does is just enable some ridiculous combos though. -4 seconds to cooldowns isn't a source of cooldown reduction, which means it doesn't really have diminishing returns, and it can make your low cooldown skills have 0 cooldown at all. Using this, you can do things like have infinite blinks through the Blink Spirit skill, which normally would have a cooldown, but this completely removes, and it even breaks certain items with internal cooldowns built into them, such as the Choir of the Storm's Amulet, which procs Lightning Bolt whenever you crit. Normally this has a half-second internal cooldown between between procs, so you can't just crit 20 times per second and get 20 lightning bolts, but Temporalis removes that restriction. It removes the internal cooldown and lets you infinitely chain your lightning bolts. It's actually very broken. There are very few of this item that exist, and it's probably the simultaneously rarest and strongest item in the entire game. That said, there is another unique worth talking about from Xerac as well, which is the Against the Darkness unique Time Lost Jewel. This, when put in your tree, gives you a large radius around it, and each small passive within the radius gives you a bonus. Each notable within range gives you a different bonus. The actual bonuses tied to these are random, but can be quite powerful, ranging from resistances and even maximum resistances to things like bonus spirit or percent increases to attributes, which has a ton of scaling potential, or even things like bonus damage gained as fire damage per notable, which is a whole bonus multiplier in your build. These things can get crazy. There is a ton of RNG involved, of course. They can go as low as 1 divine orb on the trade market. A decent one is more like 5 divine orbs, and a fantastic one can be way more than that. There are 3 more items that I want to talk about today then, all from different sources. The first is the Melting Maelstrom unique Mana Flask. This comes from the Pinnacle boss, which is attached to the Delirium endgame activity. This thing is sort of nuts in how different it is from a normal mana flask. On use, it instantly fills all of your mana, then you recover 310 mana over the next 10 seconds. During this time, every 3 seconds, you will deal damage to nearby enemies in proportion to half of the mana that you spent over that time. And when the flask effect ends, you will take 25% of your current mana as chaos damage. Where this is particularly strong is for essentially any build that spends and uses lots of mana, and ideally also has chaos inoculation for immunity to chaos damage in the first place, removing the negative part. And of course, where this particularly synergizes again is Stormweavers, with their Archmage shenanigans, where they're already stacking tons and tons of mana, they are spending tons and tons of mana, and this turns that into even more damage as well as a result. The cost for that? Around 35 divine orbs on average, so quite the pretty penny. Then second to last, there's a particularly high potential unique that drops exclusively from the Trial Master, the pinnacle boss at the end of a 10-chamber Trials of Chaos run that you also need to collect fragments to fight too. But one of his exclusive drops is Mahuzadl's Machination. This thing increases the effect of socketed soul cores by up to 666% on a maximum natural roll. This is massive in itself, with the main combo making it as expensive as it is, being the soul core that gives you 10% bonus rarity of items found, sticking 2 of those into the shield with a maximum roll, and it essentially gives you a bonus 135% rarity of items found on top of the 20% from the base soul cores. If you get a really lucky Val Orb and set it to 3 sockets as a shield as well when you corrupt it, you can then stick in a third one, and in total you would get 230% increased rarity of items found from just this one singular item slot. This stat is extremely strong for finding the currency that you need to make the rest of your gear better and even get some of these other uniques too, and this is the most condensed way of getting an absolute buttload of it. An uncorrupted 2-socket version of the shield generally goes for around 5 divine orbs, and if you can corrupt it into a 3-socket version with a decent roll on the modifier itself, it goes for 15 to 20 divine orbs generally. Then our final unique that I wanted to discuss today comes from the hardest boss in the game, the pinnacle of all pinnacle bosses, the Arbiter of Ash, and that unique is Moror Invictus. The unique part of this item depends on a ton of RNG to make it actually function well. Specifically, it comes with 4 rune sockets as a base, which is pretty cool in itself. You can pop it up to 5 if you get a good corruption roll on it, but the item itself also randomly rolls its modifiers for a few different potential bonuses. No matter what though, they are all variations of upgrades and increases that depend on the number of soul cores that are slotted in, with the most popular rolls being increased maximum mana per soul core socketed within this, which at 5% each, naturally with 5 sockets, would be 25% bonus maximum mana, which is nuts for Stormweavers. You can get increased spirit per socketed rune, or soul core as well, which can also stack up quite well. You can get increased all defenses per socketed rune or soul core, 5% increased all attributes per socketed rune or soul core, which is great for stat stacking builds. There's even an increased rarity of items found per socketed rune or soul core modifier possible for this, and with 5 sockets you can stick in 5 of the soul core that gives you 10% item rarity each, and essentially end up with 100% rarity of items found from your body armor now as well. There are plenty of variations of this item. A bad one can go for less than a divine orb, a great one is 20 at minimum, and if you want a great one with 5 sockets corrupted into it as well already, you're looking at some exorbitant prices out of the range of most normal players. All in all, aside from just a fun conversation about some really cool items in the game, the main thing this brings me back to pretty much every time is just how unapproachable the endgame economy is for the majority of players. If you did not get into it early, get really deep early, and make currency while everything was cheap, you are so far behind the economy of the top players now that it feels like an insurmountable wall to just get a few power increases across like a couple of your items. Not to mention the concept of being able to afford something like an Astramentis or a well-rolled Moror Invictus or, God forbid, Temporalis. These items are all really cool for their own reasons, and the vast majority of them are just completely out of reach for most of the people who play this game, and that's a shame. That said, I felt the need to say that quickly after talking for so long about items that some of them are in the triple digits of divine orbs in trade value, but mostly I did just want to talk about these uniques, why they are as powerful and popular as they are, and the ways of acquiring them for yourself if you want to give them a go, if you have the option, of course. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.